You're walking home after a long day of work when a small piece of metal slices your finger. It's barely noticeable. You rinse it with water, wrap it in a cloth, and forget about it. Today, that's usually the end of the story. But for most of human history, that tiny cut could quietly become your death sentence. Within days, the wound might swell. A fever would follow. Soon, even the strongest person could be too weak to stand. There were no antibiotics, no hospitals, no ambulances. No one had ever seen a bacterium or understood what an infection was. Yet despite living in a world where everyday injuries could be fatal, humanity survived. Not only did our ancestors survive, they built civilizations, crossed continents, and created the foundations of the modern world. So how? How did people keep defeating an enemy they didn't even know existed? Most people assume the answer is hidden in some forgotten medical secret, a miracle herb, an ancient cure, knowledge that somehow disappeared over time. But history tells a completely different story. The greatest weapon against disease wasn't a medicine. It wasn't a doctor. And it certainly wasn't luck. It was something far simpler. The ability to notice patterns. That single skill kept humanity alive long before anyone understood the science behind it. To ancient people, disease looked random. Two neighbors could drink from the same river. One became violently ill. The other stayed perfectly healthy. Two soldiers might suffer nearly identical wounds in battle. One recovered, the other died. Without knowing about germs, there seemed to be no logical explanation. Many believed illness came from angry gods, curses, or evil spirits. And when the enemy is invisible, those explanations can sound convincing. But while priests searched for supernatural answers, ordinary people were making a different kind of discovery. They were watching, remembering, comparing. A healer noticed that one treatment seemed to work more often than another. A family realized that water from one well was safer than water from another. A village remembered which seasons brought certain illnesses. They couldn't explain why any of it happened, but they didn't need to, because every successful observation became a lesson, and every lesson was passed to the next generation. Long before medicine became science, it became experience. That may not sound revolutionary, but one simple observation made nearly 4,000 years ago is still helping doctors today. And it began with something most of us already have in our kitchens. The discovery happened in ancient Egypt, not because Egyptian healers understood disease better than everyone else, but because they paid attention. Imagine working under the blazing sun, carving enormous blocks of stone. A sharp rock slips. Your hand is cut. At first, it's only painful. The real danger comes later. By the next day, the wound is swollen. Soon, a fever begins. In the ancient world, this was often the point where people started preparing for the worst. Without antibiotics, even a simple infection could become fatal. Over generations, Egyptian healers tried countless treatments. Most failed. Some probably made wounds even worse. But one remedy kept producing an unusual result. Honey. Not because it looked special, not because priests declared it sacred, because patients treated with it seemed more likely to survive. No one knew why. There were no experiments, no microscopes, no understanding of bacteria. Only one undeniable pattern. This seems to work. Thousands of years later, modern science discovered that honey naturally inhibits the growth of many harmful bacteria, which explains why specially prepared medical-grade honey is still used for certain wounds today. Think about what that really means. One of humanity's oldest medical discoveries wasn't the result of scientific knowledge. It was the result of careful observation repeated over hundreds of years. And that lesson reached far beyond Egypt. Across the ancient world, people slowly realized something remarkable. They didn't always need to understand why something worked, to recognize that it worked. That realization changed the future of medicine, because once people started trusting evidence more than assumptions, they began asking better questions. Instead of asking, which god caused this illness? Some began asking, why do these people become sick, while others don't? Those questions spread across the ancient Greek world. Many of the answers were still wrong. Some believed disease came from imbalances inside the body. Others blamed unhealthy air. But for the first time, illness was being treated as something that followed natural rules instead of supernatural ones. It was the birth of a completely different way of thinking. And although Greek thinkers didn't discover germs, they discovered something almost as important, that every disease leaves clues. And if you study those clues carefully enough, nature begins revealing its secrets. That new mindset would inspire one civilization to solve a problem they didn't even realize they had. In doing so, they accidentally saved millions of lives. The Romans never discovered bacteria. In fact, they didn't even know bacteria existed, yet they solved one of history's biggest health problems anyway. Not through medicine, through engineering. As the Roman Empire grew, so did its cities. Thousands of people lived side by side. Markets overflowed with merchants. Animals wandered crowded streets. Waste piled up. If disease was looking for the perfect place to spread, it had found one. Epidemics swept through Roman cities with terrifying speed. But instead of accepting filthy living conditions as inevitable, Roman engineers did something extraordinary. They built systems. Fresh water traveled for miles through towering aqueducts. Underground sewers carried waste away from crowded neighborhoods. Public fountains provided cleaner drinking water. To them, these were engineering projects. To history, they became some of the earliest public health measures ever created. The Romans weren't trying to defeat invisible microbes. They were simply making cities cleaner. Ironically, that was exactly what many diseases hated most. It's one of history's greatest accidents. An empire remembered for its roads may have saved even more lives with its plumbing. But even the greatest cities couldn't stop every outbreak. Again and again, disease returned. Sometimes it spread through villages, sometimes through armies. In fact, throughout much of history, illness often killed more soldiers than the battles themselves. That forced ordinary people to notice something else. Whenever sickness entered a household, it rarely stayed there. One family became ill, then the neighbors, then the next street. The pattern repeated too many times to ignore. So people changed their behavior. They postponed celebrations, avoided crowded gatherings, kept their distance from the sick whenever possible. No one called it quarantine. That word wouldn't exist for centuries, but its basic idea had already been discovered. Experience had taught people a simple lesson. If disease spreads with people, keeping apart can slow it down. No microscopes, no scientific papers, just observation. Once again, humanity had stumbled onto a life-saving strategy long before understanding why it worked. By now, a pattern should be emerging. Honey wasn't the real breakthrough. Roman sanitation wasn't the real breakthrough. Even early quarantine wasn't the real breakthrough. They were all consequences of something much deeper. Humanity kept surviving because it learned from every epidemic. Why did two people exposed to the same disease sometimes have completely different outcomes? Why would one die, while the other recovered and never become sick in quite the same way again? For thousands of years, no one could answer that question, because the final piece of the puzzle was hidden inside every human being. The answer had been there all along, hidden inside every person who survived. Every time someone recovered from an infection, their body remembered, not their mind, their immune system. Without anyone realizing it, the human body had been keeping a record of every battle it won. The next time that same disease appeared, it didn't face a complete stranger. It faced an opponent that was better prepared, faster, stronger. For thousands of years, people saw the result, but never understood the reason. A survivor often had a better chance of surviving again. To ancient civilizations, it looked like luck, or fate, sometimes even divine protection. But the real miracle wasn't supernatural, it was biological. Long before the invention of microscopes, long before doctors understood bacteria or viruses, the immune system had already become humanity's greatest defense against disease. And while our bodies were learning, so were we. Every epidemic left behind more than tragedy. It left behind experience. Parents warned their children about unsafe water. Healers remembered which treatments gave patients the best chance of recovery. Builders designed cleaner cities. Communities slowly changed the way they responded to outbreaks. None of these people believed they were changing history. They were simply trying to survive until tomorrow. Yet together, Their discoveries became something far greater than any single invention. They became the foundation of modern medicine. Today, when a surgeon cleans a wound before stitching it, when clean drinking water flows from your tap, or when a vaccine trains your immune system to recognize a dangerous disease, you're seeing the result of thousands of years of lessons built one generation at a time. Modern medicine wasn't created overnight. It is the accumulated wisdom of countless ordinary people who noticed what worked, remembered it, and passed it on. So how did ancient people survive deadly diseases without knowing what caused them? Not because they had forgotten miracle cures, not because they were somehow stronger than we are. They survived because they never stopped learning. Every epidemic taught a lesson. Every generation inherited those lessons. And little by little, humanity tipped the odds in its favor. History isn't only written in the ruins of ancient cities or in the pages of old books. It's written inside us, inside the knowledge we've inherited, inside the immune system protecting you at this very moment. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson our ancestors left behind. Civilization wasn't built because humanity defeated disease. It was built because humanity refused to stop learning from it. If you enjoyed uncovering one of history's greatest survival stories, I'd love to know what surprised you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments and like the video. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden stories behind the world we live in today, consider subscribing. There are countless moments in history that changed our lives in ways most of us never realize. Until next time, keep questioning the past, because sometimes the answers to the future have been hiding there all along.